If you finish your story and it's just too short, I know the feeling, I've been there. I've got a few things that might help, so stick with me, and by the end of this video, hopefully I'll have a solution for you that will bring your story value as well as just length. So let's get started. For context, I've written 8 novels and a few of them ended up under the word count that I was really looking for, and I've done a few things that have helped. The first thing to consider might not be what you want to hear, but it's definitely worth considering before we look at anything else. We could look at the story as it is right now, finished, and say, maybe it's just as long as it needs to be. It's worth considering whether your story's actually finished and it's just short, and that's just the way it is. It happens. The thing is though, if you're thinking about publishing or sending your work to a competition, word count requirements exist. And ideally, if there's length left in your story and you'd love to make it that little bit longer, let's talk about some ways to do that and some ways not to. If I could tell you just one thing about this, I think it's that the secret to making your story longer is that you have to add value as well as just length. I thought about this concept recently when I was editing the book that I'm working on now, and I was reminded of the answer. I imagine my story, a novel in this case, like this. So it's a horizontal line, and going from left, which is the beginning, to right, which is the ending, are all of my events, everything that happens in my book. So it's like a timeline. And from looking at it like this, I realised something. So our story's too short, we know that. The simplest solution is to add more words, make the story longer. Simple. We could just add more story, we could splice more events into it, make things up, add a few more twists and turns, there we go, story's longer, word count's increased, problem solved. I've tried doing that quite a few times with my old novels, and it always brought me problems. Firstly, if it were that easy to just add in more events and twists and turns, wouldn't we have already done that in the first draft? Wouldn't it already be part of the story? Secondly, if these events weren't there the first time and we're just adding them in now, then that means they probably aren't required for the plot to function. The plot could do just fine without them. A novel, as I'm sure you know, is a really delicate balance of events, plot points, characterization, structure, pacing, a million things. To go back into an already drafted story and add in more events and more things happening has a knock-on effect to the rest of the story. The exception to this, of course, is if you've had an epiphany about something that was missing from your novel the whole time. It's dropped into place, it's totally obvious, and now you need to rewrite. In that case, yeah, add new things. That probably will work. But going back to add events in just for length feels to me like you've baked a cake and now you want to go back and add more eggs. I've done that a few times, as I said, and it's always pretty noticeable. Those add-ins seem out of place and inconsistent, and it ends up making your story weaker, not stronger. So that must mean then, to make a story longer, we have to make it stronger at the same time. So how do we do that? The same way we make any story stronger. It's by adding something of value to it. To me, the most valuable thing about any story is how it makes me feel. Those moments that give me pause or reflect on the human condition or give me chills up the back of my spine. That stuff to me is value, it's meaning. That's the stuff that will strengthen your story while it also happens to make it longer. So I was thinking about that line again while I was trying to figure out how to add meaning to a story. And the answer came to me. We don't add in events from left to right. We don't lengthen the story that way. Instead, what we need to do is add in from up and down. We need to make the story deeper. What I mean by up and down is we don't change the narrative, that carefully constructed sequence of events that you've worked so hard on in drafting this book. That stays the same. Instead, we add more meaning and more depth to the events that we already have. And there's loads of times where we can do that. We can do it at every twist and turn, every time our character reflects on something, or every beat of the story. There's loads of opportunities. Now that we know our story because we've drafted it, we can have a bit more confidence in taking some time in the quiet, important moments to reflect a bit more. We can allow our character to lose themselves in their thoughts a little bit more, or to reflect on the theme of the story, or the point of why you were writing the story in the first place. These are the things that I think can add that much needed length to our stories because they add value to it at the same time without changing the entire structure that we've worked so hard on, or struggled with entirely in my case. I hear the question though, from a practical sense, what do we expand on? It's down to your imagination and how well you know your story really, but one of my favourite ways to expand on any story is just by showing it from a different angle that we didn't have before. For example, in the novel I'm working on now, I added a newspaper article into the text because I needed to add some background information and develop a bit of mystery around a location, in this case an island. I already had two characters talk about it. They discussed the island and some of the mysteries surrounding it, but I could only go so far using just dialogue. I needed something else to expand it, without making an awkward conversation that was full of obvious exposition. So I wrote a news article and I placed it into the story at the point where I thought it would be most effective. And it added words and it made the story longer, but it also brought value to it. It added to that intrigue and that mystery that I was looking for from an angle that I couldn't have done just from my characters. It added value beyond just word count. It added something that I didn't have before. Another example of ways to expand your story could be something as simple as journal entries or letters or emails or even texts from your main character or your side characters. If they're a solitary or isolated character and you can't reveal their innermost thoughts through dialogue or simple narration, then having them write down their thoughts is a great way to let your reader in on their secrets while allowing them to keep their secrets at the same time. And if your character is surrounded by other people, you can create a disconnect between what they say in dialogue and what they say to themselves in their own private writing. That's fun characterization. Depending on your strengths and weaknesses as a writer, adding this kind of thing in can be a nice break from the sometimes monotony of just passage after passage, for you as a writer and also for readers. I love writing dialogue, personally. I love how when a character speaks, a little bit of their mind leaks out, whether they want that to happen or not. But I can't write an entire novel just of dialogue. I mean, we have that, it's called a play. And also, I feel I need more context to build a story into an entire novel. So in my current book, I have about 10 chapters that are just transcripts of an interview, complete with background noise, background movements, as well as the conversation. And you know what? Those were the most fun parts to write for me. The point is, you don't need to come up with or make up a load of new things to add into your book to make it longer. Show the things that you already have from different angles, like different character POVs, stuff like that. Take all the valuable stuff that you've already written into your book and just expand on that. As long as it adds something that wasn't there before, beyond just words, then you're adding value to your story. And don't worry about, can I add this type of thing or this type of thing to my book? I haven't already, will it work? Just write it, just try it and see. So that's how I think you make a story longer. Don't just add to it, expand it. I hope this helps. Let me know in the comments, and happy writing.